Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Indie Alaska is an innovative weekly web series capturing the diverse and colorful lifestyle of Alaskans. Real stories of everyday Alaskans at work and play. Supported in part by Alyeska Pipeline Service Company.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
And good Sunday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 15th of February. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with our latest weather information at weather.gov/Alaska. Call us on the weather info line at 800-472-0391. You can always find information on Marine VHF or NOAA Weather Radio. Find us on Facebook in between the Alaska Weather Shows on Twitter using the hashtag AKWX. And of course, in the afternoon, you'll get your daily afternoon map briefing, NWS Alaska, on AKWX TV as well. After this show, the full broadcast of Alaska weather courtesy of alaskapublic.org. Now here's tonight's hazardous weather. It's really going to focus on, as far as the watches, warnings, and advisories go, generally north of the Alaska Range to the Arctic coast and also across the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta and the lower Yukon Valley. It's not to say there won't be weather other places, but it looks like some of the harshest weather may focus on the Alaska Range first and the upper Kuskokwim Valley. That's where high wind warnings start in effect tonight and will continue well into tomorrow afternoon and evening for the eastern Alaska Range. In these regions, especially in the gaps and the passes and the higher terrain, you may see winds up to 75 miles an hour. Those would be the stronger gusts there, and high wind warnings are in effect again starting tonight and lasting until at least the end of tomorrow. For the eastern Alaska Range. Now for the middle Tanana Valley and the central interior, the 40-mile country, the Yukon Flats, areas out toward Bettles, Tanana, you're expecting winter weather advisories there for blowing and drifting snow. And once again, that's going to be up on top of the passes. They're probably not down where most of the villages are. There could be some stronger winds in those regions, but the primary concerns are going to be in those channeled wind areas. So if you're usually one of the windier spots when you get a lot of wind coming over the Alaska Range, this is going to be another one of those events where the winds are probably going to come up and stir up the snow that's on the ground for you. So plan on some gusty winds and at times some poor visibility as a result of that. Also going to have some visibility issues around the coastal plain for the northern slopes of the eastern Brooks Range and up across the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Winter weather advisories will be in effect for you for tonight and into tomorrow. But west of that, for the central Beaufort Seacoast, the northern Arctic coast and westward down the Chukchi Seacoast, you're expecting to see wind chills that are down around 55 below at their worst. So wind chill advisories are in effect in those areas. And then we get out to the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and that is a winter weather advisory as well, or a freezing rain advisory, I should say. And yeah, I said freezing rain. In this case, a large storm across the Gulf of Alaska is moving north and west. And I'm going to change maps here so you can have a little bit more of a vantage point on where this is going. The storm is now across the western Gulf, and it's moving north and west and kind of stretching out across the central and eastern Aleutians. It is sending a huge chunk of warm air northward. As it does so, it might be warm enough to erode some of the ice around Bristol Bay and open that up a little bit. But it's also going to change the precipitation type. Instead of being snow across the lower Yukon Valley and the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region, we're expecting that to have the potential for maybe up to 0.2 of an inch of freezing rain around Bethel and the surrounding villages here. And a little bit further northward, and that could be about 0.1. So lesser amounts for the areas around the Yukon Delta and inland, and then higher amounts there as you get down toward Bethel and the Kuskokwim Delta region. St. Paul and St. George under a winter weather advisory for blowing snow. The good thing about this is that temperatures may be just warm enough that if you are seeing snow fall, it may be kind of wet. So you may not have a whole lot blowing around, but it's right there on the edge. So our friends at the Anchorage National Weather Service office have issued that winter weather advisory there for you, and that'll take you through tomorrow as well. So an awful lot going on, lots of different things happening all at the same time, but it's all related to the storm across the western Gulf. So let's take a look at that on the satellite picture. You can already see the leading edge of that working its way north and west, starting to change the weather pattern here across south and western Alaska already. Looking out to the west, the weather that was moving northward toward the Kamchatka Peninsula and off of eastern Asia is already changing course because of the storm system. The main storm track is right here. You can see it kind of sweeping the clouds out and kind of that letter C moving eastward. That's a sign that the jet stream is just pushing this weather quickly this way. Well, this weather was moving northward, and now that we have this interruption in the flow coming out of the Gulf of Alaska, this weather's got to go somewhere else. So it's going to curve down to the south and get out of the way. So this is the predominant weather maker as it's moving across the Alaska Peninsula tomorrow. A lot of turbulence, icing potential, and of course, weather potential there for south and western Alaska. Here's the rest of the state. And look at southeast, catching a little bit of a break today. There were some pockets of rain here and there, but not as bad as it has been. However, the stats for Juneau, this could be one of the wettest periods to date for the rain season. 2015. If you haven't been to Facebook today and you haven't got your Facebook fixed just yet, take a look at NWS Alaska, the National Weather Service office, and Juneau put together some stats, and just to show you how wet 2015 has been compared to other years today. It's pretty impressive stuff, and if you're growing gills, that's probably why. Looking out across the Gulf of Alaska, this circulation is working north and west, and look at that, spiraling in on itself. It's really pretty when you look at it from outer space, isn't it? And as the clouds sweep over the Alaska Range, the wind is really going to pick up across Kodiak Island. Already did today. Dutch Harbor saw gusts upwards in the 50-mile-an-hour range today, so blustery there for sure. And as this continues working northward, that warm and wet air will sink into the Yukon and Kuskokwim Delta, and with that, that freezing rain potential could develop. It's also going to be a pretty wet period from Prince William Sound across the eastern Kenai Peninsula and into Kodiak Island. Look for some heavy rain potential there for the next couple days. That's not going to change. And all the air moving across the Arctic coast, that's where the blowing snow comes in, that's where the wind chills come in, and also looking for blowing and drifting snow across the central interior, the Tanana Valley, and of course those high winds across the upper Kuskokwim Valley and the Alaska Range. So just a whole lot going on, all thanks to that beautiful thing we can see from outer space moving to the west and northwest. This is probably going to steer a little bit more across the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula as we go ahead in time. So let's look at it with the surface map in mind. Now, high pressure sitting across the southern Yukon at 1,034 millibars, sitting tight right there. Well, this is all feeding into that big weather conveyor belt, moving that warm and wet air across the Gulf of Alaska, putting the soaker on for Homer and Seward today and around Kodiak Island, and really the Pacific side of the Alaska Peninsula. The other side's drying out just a little bit unless some of that moisture is making it through. In a few places like False Pass, we're seeing some snow. Dutch Harbor on Alaska, pretty windy today. Some pockets of snow for the interior in places around the middle Yukon Valley, down toward Galena, Tin City, and around the Chukchi Seacoast. Saw a few spot snow showers, but by and large, it was a fairly dry day, again, for the interior. But by tonight, more and more of that moisture is working into south and western Alaska. The front should cross over Bristol Bay, and with that, you should see a noticeable rise in those temperatures as we head through the daytime tomorrow, really starting to break up some of the slush and the ice there in Bristol Bay, so don't be surprised to see some changes there in the coastal areas, not to mention on land. Warm and wet air is working northward toward Prince William Sound and the Barren Islands. We're going to see storm force winds across the region with very strong barrier jet here moving from east to west, so watch for the marine conditions out here to be pretty nasty, especially in the early morning. Now, conditions will change as we go through the day, so the worst weather at sea will definitely be the first half of the day. Same goes for flying weather, really, and as we get into Tuesday, you'll see remarkable changes and improvements in the weather. So as the frontal boundary moves into Prince William Sound, we're still watching for some heavier rainfall around Prince William Sound, eastern sections of the Kenai, and all the way out toward Kodiak Island. Low pressure at this point should be fairly close to the bearing at 974 millibars. Strong winds racing over the Alaska Range tomorrow. Again, gusts up to 75 miles per hour, and some of those gap-prone areas. And then across the middle and upper Yukon Valley, blowing and drifting snow, probably an issue there, especially for the central interior and the Arctic coast, and dangerous wind chills, especially for the central Beaufort Seacoast westward, where those values could drop to a feels-like index around 55 below. As we get into Tuesday, high pressure is going to try and set up camp across Seward, 1,016 millibars. It still looks like there's a decent chance for precipitation in the region. Periods of rain and snow will mix across south central and southwestern Alaska. Still could be dealing with freezing rain. And look how far north this goes, all the way up toward Nome, the Norton Sound region. You're still looking at probably some snow mixing in and maybe some freezing rain, although right now it looks to be fairly light. We'll have to see how that changes because it really depends on how much of that warm air gets northward and exactly what kind of track this low pressure system is. Every day we analyze it, it changes just a little bit more as the models get a little bit better handle on exactly where the system is, how strong it is, and the track that the upper level winds are taking it. So stay tuned if you're on the west coast there and you're concerned about the icing potential or just how much snow you're going to see. But you'll notice, one thing is sure, that we're going to get into a much broader southerly flow up the west coast. And while that does mean snow and blowing snow for areas along the Chukchi Seacoast and the interior of Kotzebue Sound, it also means much warmer weather for you compared to where you've been. The front will quickly die out as we head through Tuesday. Behind that, another surge of warmer air working up the eastern Gulf Coast. More clouds than anything else across central and southern parts of southeast on Tuesday. Rain will focus mainly on the northern third. Snow above 2,000 to 2,500 feet, it looks like, across the Skagway and Haines region. And then west of that, conditions start to mix up again into rain and snow for many. Here's a look at temperatures then today. 30s and 40s for much of southeast, south central. Also very mild for Homer and Seward, easily in the 40s. In fact, Homer was 47. 33 in Anchorage, above freezing for one of the first times in a while. 10 degrees in Fairbanks today. 14 in Eagle. Conditions warming up there for the interior. Fort Yukon up to 9. 7 in AKWX Pass, and the Arctic coast holding tight with temperatures well below zero, anywhere from 25 to 35 below again. 5 to 10 above for the Kotzebue Sound region, 13 in Nome as well as Unalakleet. Grayling was 12, McGrath 15, Bethel 22. Bristol Bay temperatures in the mid to upper 30s, in fact 40 close to King Salmon. Mid 30s for most of the Alaska Peninsula, also for St. Paul and St. George, Adak and Atka, and Shemya at 35 with Kodiak Island holding at 40. Overnight lows will stay in the single digits for the interior. Southwest looking at 20s and 30s, almost 40 degrees in fact for King Salmon. Same goes for Kodiak. Mid to upper 30s for southeast. South central at or just below freezing. The Arctic coast around 20 below for many. St. Paul 29 with a high of 33 tomorrow. Southwest easily in the mid 40s. And again, it's going to be a windy and messy day. 43 in Kodiak. Low to mid 40s for northern southeast to southern southeast, including Craig and Klawock. Might tap 50 degrees tomorrow. Temperatures up north only 5 below, but that's substantially warmer than where you've been. Flying weather shows many areas across southwest looking at least some time in IFR conditions, especially around the mountains and the windward side of the Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound, Kodiak Island, the Alaska Peninsula, Nunivak Island, the YK Delta. It looks like a mess as the system's working over. Here's your pass conditions. If you're going through AKWX or Adigan Pass, you might find some chop, but it looks like the visibility should be okay. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we're going to call IFR. All the way around the Horn to Rainy Pass and Windy Pass tomorrow, Isabel Pass, and it looks like Mentasta Pass is going to lean that way, may not get all the way over to IFR, but probably trending toward MVFR conditions quickly. Tanita Pass, likely IFR conditions there. Same goes for Portage Pass. The western side may lift a little bit during the day, and Chilkoot and White Pass with snow and rain in the region. We're calling IFR by the end of the day. Look at this warm and wet air surging northward there. You can see the 2,000-foot freezing level all the way into the Yukon Delta region. 4,000 to 6,000 feet sneaking over Kodiak Island and Bristol Bay. And there's more to come, 8,000 to 10,000 foot freezing levels there south of Haida Gwaii and also working over southeastern Alaska there with the surface freezing line really not changing much, hovering very close to the Pribilofs. Icing potential. It looks like there's a really good chance of icing across Bristol Bay and the Alaska Peninsula, maybe as far west as Dutch Harbor though. Many areas will see occasional icing spreading well into the interior and westward there, so just be careful. But a lot of this is going to be fairly high up there too until you get north of the Yukon where that's below 2,000 feet. Elsewhere below 4 to 6, so if you can run a little lower than that, you should be pretty much okay staying in the warm air. High pressure is doing this to us at the jet stream level. It's just pushing that general flow pattern very far to the north. So all that warm and wet air surging northward right up the western coast with speeds at 120 to 150 knots coming over southwestern Alaska. 9,000 feet, that flow can't do anything except do exactly what the jet stream is doing in this case. So a southerly flow, 40 to 50 knots, running right up the west coast, the circulation moving back into the southern Bering Sea, and high pressure trying to slow things down over southeast, not doing such a great job yet with wind speeds there between 35 and 40 knots. Similar conditions at 3,000 feet, a broad southerly flow sweeping over all of Alaska at this level. 30 to 35 knots across most areas, including the interior. The strongest winds across the southwest and the YK Delta, Kodiak Island and the Alaska Peninsula with wind speeds there at least at 50 knots, maybe higher. Northerlies continue for the central and western chain with southeast looking at winds between 30 and 35. So we might guess that there should be some turbulence, and indeed there is. You can see that wrapping all the way around. Many areas there across south central looking at probably some isolated severe around the Anchorage Bowl, around the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula and into the Barrens, across the Norton Sound region out towards St. Matthew, and above 2,000 feet for many in the central chain. There may be a little bit of improvement there across southwestern Alaska during the day, but hold on to the yoke, and if you have to fly tomorrow, check your maps twice. Let's look at your aviation forecast. Back with a sea ice update and your marine weather here in just a few minutes.
Another area where the Federal Aviation Administration is using technology in advancing aviation safety is in the use of remote weather cameras as a tool to aid pilots in making safe flight decisions. Hello, I'm Sheila Balistreri.
So in '99, we really started what we currently call the Alaska Weather Camera Program. We say Alaska because it's the only place in the FAA that has this. One, it's available through the internet so that the pilots, their family, their friends, they can all take a look at what the weather's like before you go there. In addition, we have all of that available within all of our flight service stations so that each flight service station technician can call up and look at weather real time. And with that, provide a better briefing, whether it's pre-flight or in-flight for the pilots. By far the most popular thing we've ever done.
The weather camera system has been a good one. I'm sure you can tell from the, if you had access to the number of hits that they get that, on each site, that they're well used and they save a lot of gasoline, they save a lot of time for passengers out turning around in weather and coming back when a pilot can just look at the camera and make a decision based on that rather than going out and actually looking at the weather.
When we look at the cameras, and if it's a definite no-go situation, then we're not able, we don't send an airplane out to take a look at it and then have to just spend the gas and the time and energy to go out, take a look at it, and just turn around and come back.
By placing weather cameras throughout the state, we've certainly come a long way. Today, we have 55 cameras throughout the state, an investment of $7 million. 12 new sites are scheduled to be up and running by this October. This concept, I think, is stunning in its simplicity. The pilot goes online and can view 2 images for each location. The first shows what the site would look like in a perfectly clear day situation. The second shows current weather conditions. Pilots can now learn what the visibility is in the mountain pass they face and whether they want to fly through it before they take off. In many instances, they may decide not to fly, to hold on that flight for a while, depending upon what they see. And that's long before they set foot in the aircraft.
Alaska is a huge state, and the area covered so far by weather cams is comparatively small. In order for the project to be completed, 165 already identified sites need to be added. In what may be considered counterintuitive, many of these weather cameras are not placed at airports, but are positioned in or near mountain passes and other geographical areas, which are often used by pilots as navigational aids. Others are located at rural airports, where there are no weather observers or co-located with automated weather systems. Pilots report that the value in these weather cameras is the real-time information they receive about destination and route conditions. Flight service specialists also have access to the weather camera images and routinely brief pilots with the most up-to-date information before takeoff and during their flight.
We use the weather cams in two basic ways here at the flight service station. For self-briefing, to get ready to be able to brief the pilots, to look at the weather cam where we have an airport with a weather report. We can compare what we see on the screen with what the weather report says. Where we do not have weather reports available, then we can look at the camera and again get a picture of what the weather is like at those locations.
When I get up in the morning, the first thing I do is pull up the weather cameras at all the destinations in the Southeast and check that against the actual reports at that station, and it gives you a lot better picture of what the weather's doing than what we used to enjoy with just the observation. I'm sure all the pilots are doing the same thing. I know all of our pilots do. A well-placed camera looking in 3 different directions, there's nothing like that. Be able to see in real time what your weather actually looks like before you take off.
Cost benefit is quite a bit. Started saving us money. We don't launch a flight when we know that the weather is bad. When we can see it on the cameras that the weather is bad at our destination.
When the weather cam system was first proposed, there were some people who doubted its utility, and as they've come online, we've seen how the pilots really like to be able to see those pictures. They value it, and as they become available to us as briefers, we value it too.
I do thank you also for the cameras. I personally have used the cameras. I think that probably the one that's most used is the one over going through the pass into Lake Clark, and from time to time I get calls that it may not be functioning properly, which I'm pleased to say that Mr. Poe responds to very quickly.
During a recent independent study of Alaska pilots who have used the system, 68% reported making decisions to cancel or delay flights based on weather camera information. Pilots also reported that these decisions help them avoid additional fuel costs from flights that must be diverted or repeated due to bad weather. Now, these safety and economic advantages generated more than 2.3 million hits this past year on the FAA's Alaska WeatherCam website.
Thanks, Sheila. The sea ice edge continues to hover very close to St. Paul. It's within about 7.5 nautical miles there. The ice strip's a little bit closer than that, but you can see the main ice pack is still holding to the northeast of St. Paul. The rest of the Bering Sea continues to see pretty broad coverage there, but we're going to watch this area around Bristol Bay in the next couple days as that warm air continues to lift northward, and a lot of wind is working over that ice as well. So expect some changes there in rapid form, especially south of Macoriac and generally from St. Paul eastward into Bristol Bay. Here's a look at what's going on across southeast. Look for winds coming in from the southeast along the outer coast there from 25 to 40 knots or so. The strongest in the north with seas as high as 20 feet. Lynn Canal winds coming in from the north tomorrow, 15 knots, and you'll see by Tuesday that conditions really don't change a whole lot there, except we'll see that reverse to more of a southerly flow. Southeasterlies continue up the outer coast, 20 to 25 knots for Tuesday. Storm force winds continue tonight and across the northern and western Gulf for Monday. A strong barrier jet just outside of Montague Island in the entrance there. 55 knots with a 25-foot sea, 21-foot seas east of the Barrens. 50-knot winds also making it to the west of the islands, and a northeast wind coming down Cook Inlet with 40 knots there passing Kenai and Calgon Island. Easterlies in Chillicothe Strait and 18-foot seas east of Kodiak Island on a southerly flow. All areas see diminishing winds as we get into Tuesday. We'll have a southerly flow working up into Resurrection Bay and the eastern side of Kenai Peninsula. Southeasterlies coming over the Kenai Mountains and over Cook Inlet at 10 to 20 knots, and 10-knot winds there with an east flow in Prince William Sound with a 2-foot sea. For the Alaska Peninsula, easterlies tomorrow at 35 knots there, 11-foot seas a little bit further down the coast on the Pacific side, 40 to 45 knots, 19 to 22-foot seas there for your Monday. On Tuesday, a broad southerly flow across the entire region, 30-knot winds there. The winds probably won't be too terribly strong by the time we get into Tuesday. They're 5 to 7-foot seas on the Bering side, holding at 16-foot seas there for the Pacific side on Tuesday. For Monday, a northwesterly flow coming across the Aleutians. The strongest winds will probably be from Nikolsky eastward toward Unalaska and closer to that low pressure system. Northerlies from Kiska to Attu at 20 to 25 knots, 7 to 10-foot seas in the west compared to 12 to 15-foot seas there in the Bering and Pacific sea coasts. As we get to Tuesday, notice that the winds again are still wrapping into low pressure, so we've got a westerly shift taking place across the central and eastern islands. 20 to 30-knot winds for the central and eastern areas with the highest seas probably south of Nikolsky and Unalaska at 10 to 12 feet, and northerlies still across Kiska and Attu at 20 to 25 knots there with 9-foot seas expected in those areas. As we get into Monday for the west coast, look for a northeasterly wind coming down from St. Lawrence Island, 8-foot seas in the Kuskokwim Bay, 14-foot seas around the Pribilofs with a 35-knot wind, about the same conditions there up towards St. Matthew. By Tuesday, low pressure is right about here. You can tell that by the wind flow. Easterlies coming off the YK Delta, northerlies over St. Matthew, westerlies coming into the Pribilofs, and southerlies coming up the Kuskokwim Delta. 30-knot winds closer to the coast and an 8-foot sea there. Now for the north coast, look for an easterly wind, strongest in the eastern Beaufort Seacoast region around Kaktovik, and then diminishing as you head west toward Prudhoe Bay. Northeasterlies coming down past Cape Lisburne and through Kotzebue Sound, 15 to 20 knots there. And the winds pick up even more as we get into Tuesday, so watch for blowing and drifting snow, especially along the Beaufort Seacoast there as we get into the midweek. Here's a recap of tonight's weather. A lot going on. We have high wind warnings for the Alaska Range and the upper Kuskokwim Valley. Along that frontal boundary, a lot of wind with gusts up to 75 miles per hour starting tonight and going into the end of tomorrow. Winter weather advisories for the central interior, including the Fairbanks region, mainly for the gaps and passes. You may see poor visibility with the blowing and drifting snow. Also looking at winter weather advisories for the coastal plain north of the eastern Brooks Range and the eastern Beaufort Seacoast. Otherwise, it's wind chill advisories for the rest of the Arctic coast, with those values down to 55 below. Low pressure spreads into the southern Bering tomorrow, bringing more rain and freezing rain with it. Thanks.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.